Politics. We're in the company of political scientist Robert Shapiro, professor at Columbia University. And should I add, local resident?
Yes, local resident.
You've moved down here since?
I moved down to Battery Park City in 2003, 2004.
Just right after?
Just right after.
What was going through your mind?
Well, it was part of the rebuilding period during after 9/11 in Battery Park City, and it was kind of an exciting time to see what would happen next down here. I mean, I moved down here for more personal reasons, nothing to do with 9/11.
Right, it wasn't a political statement.
It was not a political statement. Although now I feel like I should have thought of it as one.
How has the neighborhood changed in 20 years?
Well, the neighborhood has in a lot of ways built back better. They rebuilt some of the buildings that were destroyed, and then this has become a much more thriving residential area with families moving down here and schools and so forth. And things were really booming up until the pandemic, which has caused a bit of a setback.
And that's still an open question, right? Because the area, if you're looking behind us, there's Wall Street on
yes.
and in that area, after it was jammed before the COVID pandemic, we don't know if those people are all going to come back.
No, we don't know that, and a lot of businesses closed, restaurants closed, and so forth, and it's a big question whether those will come back, and it reflects the problems that have occurred in the city economically, which the new mayor will have to figure out how to deal with.
So on a September 11th, do you say to yourself, it's a day of loss, of mourning, or it's a day to celebrate the resilience of, like you say, a neighborhood that's built back better?
I think it's a little bit of both. As a political scientist, I think of it as an important marker period in American political history.
An important marker period, and we were talking about it just a moment ago with Dominic Turney. This is a country that had all of the world's support on the day. I'll always remember the front page of French broadsheet of record Le Monde. We are all Americans. Nous sommes tous américains was the headline across the front page. The French, the Germans, so many countries followed the British. I can name them all into Afghanistan, but it goes wrong pretty quickly.
It goes wrong pretty quickly with regard to how things progressed in Afghanistan, but of course the big thing was the consequences with respect to Iraq, which really changed things in a profound way.
And it gets us back to the concept of the U.S. It is an unexpected event, not just for the United States, in all fairness, for the whole world. No one was predicting that something of this sophistication could be planned, perhaps. There had been some intelligence warnings with the arrest of the so-called 20th part of that terror cell, and who's still in prison in the United States.
Yes.
But nonetheless, it did catch the whole world by surprise. The world is reeling. New York City is reeling. A few days later, when George W. Bush goes to the rubble of 9/11 and addresses the rescuers and construction workers still trying to sift through that rubble.
America today is on bended knee in prayer for the people whose lives were lost here, for the workers who work here, for the families who mourn. This nation stands with the good people of New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut as we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Yeah, that forceful response by George W. Bush on the day, repeated a couple of days later by his vice president, Dick Cheney. And what ensued was basically an all bets are off approach to catching those who helped mastermind this. Could it have been any other way? Could it have been different?
No, it couldn't be different. This was a Pearl Harbor-like moment that it really required from the United States.
With the difference being that Pearl Harbor was a nation state attacking the U.S.,
right.
the Japanese.
That's right. But this posed more of a challenge because you didn't have attackers with a known home address that you could go after. But they saw that there was a way to do it, and they felt they needed to respond. Keep in mind the country had really rallied around the event. Bush had to do a little bit of recovering. He wasn't immediately seen as the national leader on this. I don't know if people look back and remember. Actually, there was a moment where Rudolph Giuliani was leading both New York and getting national attention on that. That was Giuliani's finest moment. And then Bush came back in a very forceful and effective way.
Bush comes back in a forceful way. Of course, for many of the survivors' families, they feel there is a home address, and that is Saudi Arabia. Of course, that's not who the U.S. went after.
Yeah, that becomes much more complicated. And of course, in terms of going after Saudi Arabia, it's not necessarily a target you think of in military terms. It's a target you might think of in terms of lawsuits and economic recovery from them.
Now, the response is also these wars that have lasted 20 years, they've just come to an end.
Yes.
And then sort of a boomerang effect. Lots of veterans, lots of trauma, lots of Army surplus military hardware sold to local police departments. America's a more military place.
Yeah, that became a controversy after 9/11 when the military hardware went to local police, and there was a pullback on that, a bit of backlash on that, because those kinds of armaments were used against not foreign threats, but domestic threats on the left in the United States.
And still today, we saw a report the other day in the New York Times about a Black Lives Matter activist who was subject to this special ops 9/11 type surveillance.
Yeah, and one consequence of 9/11 was the passage of the Patriot Act, which did things to strengthen efforts with regard to security, domestic surveillance, detaining people, monitoring email and telephones, and also sending a signal to law enforcement officials that it was more important to go after the threat than to protect rights and liberties. And some of that has remained today.
So we've been watching in France and throughout the rest of the world, wondering for 4 years of Donald Trump how U.S. democracy was faring a test, especially after that assault on the U.S. Capitol. How's it faring the test of being the world's policeman? Because it's going to keep on being the world's policeman. It's got military bases in 4 continents.
Yeah, and the U.S. will be the U.S. police service monitoring what goes on around the world. In terms of taking action, I think now the idea would be to take more measured kinds of actions and to figure out how to do that. On the other hand, you'd have thought there had been learning in the past with regard to those kinds of things as well. And it's an open question what will happen going forward. The other thing to keep in mind, since you bring up Donald Trump and the assault on the Capitol, the United States is a very politically divided country now. It was actually a politically divided country at the time of 9/11, after the controversial 2000 election that was decided on partisan grounds. That is, there was partisan conflict big time then. It's expanded big time today. And after 9/11, there was a brief period where there was national unity and partisan conflict died down, but that did not last very long. And the legacy of that is how we got to where we are today. Partisan conflict increased for a whole lot of other, political reasons.
We're hearing the bell ring. I want to thank you so much, Robert Shapiro, for joining us, professor at Columbia University. That bell signaling the time when the first of the Twin Towers collapsed.